Welcome everybody to session 19 of Classic Metal Class. Scott Tarulli is here with me, and we're going to be tapping him a lot for technical stuff, but also as a fellow since childhood metalhead, we're going to be talking about a number of fairly new albums. So we're talking like 2018 on to 2022 by classic metal bands. And we're doing something a little bit different. We haven't done album reviews before. We certainly weighed in with opinions about particular albums, but here we're trying to do something a little bit more focused and technical. And before we get started, I just want to say one thing. We are going to do more of these. So, if bands that you like got left out, we may be able to get to them. Originally, we were going to try to do 12 album reviews. 8 may even be too much, as we'll find out. But I put together a list of albums by, classic metal bands. So we're talking about bands that had their origins in the 70s or 80s that were put out between 2018 and 2020. 2020, obviously, there's more stuff coming out this year, and it filled up like 2 pages worth of stuff. So we are definitely going to be doing some more of these. We're thinking about doing one specifically on new wave of British heavy metal bands, because so many of them have put things out. Obviously, we're talking about 2 of them here with Saxon and Iron Maiden, but Praying Mantis and who else was it? Not Girl School, but Rock Goddess and Tokyo Blade has put out a couple. So we're gonna do a session just on new albums by these bands. And then we're also thinking about doing one about not quite solo acts, but where it's a headliner like Herman Frank, or Udo, or people like that. So we've got plenty more to come. And, there's probably some that have not made it onto the list that should have. Before we get started, Scott, who are you most happy with these albums, this slate of albums?
Oh, wow. I have to pick one. Actually,
pick your top 3.
I was really, there were some things that I went into going, I don't know, before I listened to it, admittedly.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with the Uriah Heep.
Okay.
I think the White Snake is the best one I've heard of them since,
in a while. Yeah.
In a while. Yeah. But, I guess the main thing that this whole topic is fascinating to me, because we always have this thing about, bands phoning it in. I owe an album, or let's just put out an album, or we have no budget, but let's do it anyway. And there's a difference between these bands, it's particularly like Maiden, who drove around on no money and in a station wagon going from gig to gig. And we're talking the Young and Hungry era of people essentially living together, and really it was about that hour that they got on stage in a night, and the other 23 hours they fend for themselves. And then, being a little bit older and not having that you're not in the same place in life. So I think the exercise itself was, well, I call it an exercise, but I guess I do, because we're hearing brand new albums from classic bands, not just one, but, seeing what kind of testing the pulse of what's going on with these bands, because let's be, honest, there's not bands like these days. There may be a few throwback bands, but it's not as prevalent as it was, say, in the early 80s or the 70s.
Right, where these bands were, at least in the heavy metal area and hard rock too, just dominating. And
they're pioneers.
Yeah.
Pioneers as well.
Well, let's jump into the Iron Maiden one. We got a lot of fan feedback about this, including from Ken, and I'm going to in a bit read some of his comments at full length. Scott and I have our own views on this. but maybe we should start with looking at some of the short fan things. You want to swap off back and forth with this?
Oh,
I'll read one. And
are we at the top?
Yeah. So Gerald Sword said, overall, I think it was better than albums like No Prayer for the Dying or Number of the Beast, which is kind of a strange extension there. But really, the only songs I thought were really standout were the first three, Senjutsu, Strategio, and Writing on the Wall. It's definitely worth adding to any Maiden's fan collection, but if you're new to the band, I'd suggest starting with something else. I mean, I think that kind of makes sense. The last part, if I was going to recommend like what album to start with Iron Maiden,
right,
probably Peace of Mind or Power Slave or Somewhere in Time, maybe Killers,
that's interesting that you said that, because we have the Diana era too,
right? Well, that's so short though, and you're always kind of hesitant about recommending an early singer who is not going to stay on the scene, right? Pretty much every song off Killers becomes an Iron Maiden standard,
right?
But they're all sung by Dickinson throughout almost all of Iron Maiden's career.
Exactly.
What do you think about the other things? Is it worth adding to a fan's collection?
I have to say, I got this album when it came out, and I listened to the whole thing, and my first listen, I didn't like it at all. And I kind of put it away, and then I broke it out again and listened to it. This time I listened to it about 2-3 times.
Yeah.
And it definitely grew on me.
Okay.
But sometimes with albums, I've gone from I can't stand this album to one day going, wow, how did I not hear this? This is, fantastic. And I think it's got some classic Maidenisms. Some of the, so add it to the collection. Yeah, I mean, if you're a Maiden fan, well, the one I could do without was oh God, what's the name of it? With I love the song Rainmaker.
Okay.
It was what, the early 2000s. It was more. Their sound was kind of Renaissance fair on that album. I kind of, it's like that 6/8 kind of
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of fits in with the bass stuff that Steve Harris does, right? Who's still doing most of the writing,
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, if you're a Maiden fan, put it in your collection, because it's definitely worth owning. You get this album after the last time I listened to it all the way through, I said, this is kind of like watching a movie. They were particular about the order they put stuff in. Much like a live set list. And there is an art to putting an order to the song so the listener goes through some kind of experience, for better or for worse.
Yeah. And again, I think, Iron Maiden is sort of at an extreme for the amount of creative control that the band has over their product. And with Steve Harris essentially being, the ringleader, right? Everybody else gets to contribute, but it's still kind of his brainchild, and he's smart enough to be able to pull it off. So it's just not just like an ego trip thing. Let's take another one. And I'm going to skip down a little bit. James Aitkins, short and simply, this album is what Iron Maiden was. It's compartmentalized thematically within the context of its preceding albums in a way that makes it stand out from the others, akin to Iron Maiden's older classic albums. And the feeling of the songs individually is true to this feeling too. That's an interesting thing to say. What do you think about that, Scott?
By
the way, anybody else who wants to weigh in on what we're saying, feel free to do so in the chat. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, of course. I mean, I think it's totally fair to say, the notion of thematic, what they're writing about, like, especially the point of matter of life and death. Remember when they did that, and they did the whole album live, and the American fans were furious. But they are kind of a concept band. I mean, look, we have Eddie on the cover, and we say, hey, I really like the Somewhere in Time Eddie, or I like so there is this,
continuity kind of provided. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was what my Iron Maiden was. Something I'll throw out there technically that I noticed here is, remember, let's take Live After Death, where they were playing all the music up until that point, the live album from
Right.
'85.
Yeah.
The middle sections that had two guitars, they were in harmony. So they would play thirds or sixths. Like the Trooper is a great example of a riff. Two guitars are playing different notes and they harmonize.
Right.
What Iron Maiden's done, they've taken out the harmony, and all their epic middle sections are octaves, which are the same note, and it just sounds really huge. I still get that great Maiden effect because, the original players are making those riffs. But it's interesting how, I don't know if I'd like to ask, did you change with the times? Were you sick of the twin guitar leads? Did you think that was something of the past? Because you have three guitars now, you could stack them up any way you want. So in that sense, the middle sections is I don't know if they ever abandoned that though. So you could say it's like what Maiden was.
This is a little bit of a digression. On this album, you don't hear it as a album where three guitars are like all doing 100%. They're all doing work. There's so much that could be done with having three guitarists. I mean, you can hear the handoffs in the soloing, right? So there's solo sections, and back in the day, it used to be Adrian Smith and Dave Murray just like going back to back, just like with KK Downing and Glenn Tipton and Judas Priest. Like you could hear the distinctive thing. And on some of these songs, now these are longer songs too, so there's a lot of room to play around in the solo section. You may have like four guitar things, each with a distinctive sound to it. One more kind of tubular, and another more biting, or this is very metaphorical language, of course, but I don't get the feeling that they really use the three guitar thing to their full advantage.
And that would play out to see them live play this material, to see how they arrange.
Oh, right.
Because let's take the middle sections. There's definitely a guitar line that repeats.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve Harris moving the harmony under them, which is really important. That's a staple of Iron Maiden, where the guitars repeat, but then the bass moves to a different harmony or a different note. And the sentiment of what they're playing kind of changes. Like the Trooper, again, we all know the Trooper. If we go back to that, they're playing the same thing, but what makes that so dangerous sounding is the bass moving.
Right.
And if that wasn't there, we wouldn't, the bass is so important to that riff.
Something else that I noticed in terms of the mirroring that's going on, there's quite a few songs on there where it's you do often have like the bass mirroring the guitar to like provide extra heaviness, right? And then Steve Harris goes off and does his thing. There's a lot of songs on this where, at least for part of the song, it's Bruce Dickinson's lyrics that are being mirrored by the guitar, going like note for note. And exactly. there's even one where the bass is doing that, and I don't remember offhand, and I'm not seeing in my notes, I don't think I wrote down which one that was, but there's a lot of that going on. And I wasn't quite sure, is it gimmicky? Is it
no
good musicianship?
Well, Stratego the first one, I think, on the album where the guitar plays an octave higher. It really reinforces, because you notice on some of the choruses, Bruce Dickinson's notes get longer. So there's not as many there's not, and then having the guitar like an octave higher, copying the phrasing, it's not gimmicky. I don't think so. It definitely adds to, it's a clever way to reinforce, to fill up the sound of the voice, or maybe enunciate the words. I don't know what I'm not sure what their reason is, but I did really like that. That struck, how certain things when you listen to it struck you as Maiden-esque, and then
actually what the last album that we're going to review, LA Guns, there's a few solos in there where you're like, this kind of sounds Iron Maiden-y.
I have that in my notes. you know, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, but you know, that's a great observation that especially in the choruses, the guitar would reinforce the phrasing of the vocals. And I actually liked it. It does have a nice effect to it.
Yeah.
The way that they use it. But as far as like back to your point of the three guitars, I'd like to hear them do the material live, because even I didn't understand when Yannick first joined the band, even for the first 10 years, it's like they would double the trooper solo, or he would double or take over Adrian Smith's solo.
Yeah.
And, you know, I didn't think live they were using it. They did overdubs on Power Slave and all these albums, but they weren't reproducing the album. They were just doubling or doing things that, I mean, just personally, if I was a musical director, I'd say don't do that. But I'm not legendary, you know. If I had the great ideas, I'd be Iron Maiden.
Well, and if you came in and started saying that, Steve Harris might shut you down anyway and say, "Listen, you're not the boss of us."
So. That might be the best thing that ever happened to me, having Steve Harris shut me down.
You know, so Ken has a lot of really cool comments here, and Ken's here in the session as well. We're really happy to have all these things. So he said, lots of thoughts on this. Apologies in advance for the wall of text, but it's very well organized and there's a lot of good stuff there. So the first point, for me, Senjutsu represents peak Maiden. What do I mean by that? A couple of years ago, one of the band, can't remember who it was, though it may have been Nico, was being interviewed and explained the reason the band never got airtime outside of niche metal shows was that they preferred longer songs that didn't synergize with radio shows that tend to prefer lots of shorter songs. This, in turn, was the reason the band adopted a relentless global touring calendar, because in the earlier days, it was the only way to substantially increase their fan base. They appear on a lot of pointless best rock compilation album ever, number 47. But in the same way that they all feature Paranoid for Sabbath, the Iron Maiden track is always Run to the Hills or the Trooper or whatever, right? Maiden always have a longer epic track on their albums. I think that's right. And actually, most of their albums have more than one longer epic track. So what I mean by peak Maiden is Senjutsu has 3 longer epic tracks, those being the last 3 on the album.
Yep.
Why? Okay, so this is really interesting. Clearly, Steve Harris likes writing them. And when a band reaches this level of fame, nobody's going to make demands of the band in terms of what sort of songs they have on an album. They also feature this sort of catchier, shorter tracks that have been evident on Maiden albums since Brave New World for those who prefer the shorter or single type songs. And so I think that seems right to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to point out the last few songs were great experiences on this album. And I was like, well, you know, I always loved like Seventh Son of the song, because they bring you through so many different moods, and they're not in a rush to get out of a section.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
They're not in a rush, and they're letting the listener kind of ride that. And they even did it on Somewhere in Time to a degree, like Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Maybe that wasn't a super long song, but the what I call it, the kind of the dreamy guitar in the middle, where they go into different, like they might go into a halftime, but they let you kind of zone out, and then they bring you back into the tune in a different way. So, and I would say the long songs are very clever, and I enjoy the journey through them with Iron Maiden, because they're not they're not in their experimental phase where they're like, oh, let's just put something in 7, or let's
and there's also, you know, like we want to talk about like a classic formative phase up to like maybe Somewhere in Time, you know. Number of the Beast has Hallowed Be Thy Name, same sort of dynamics that you're talking about. And then
exactly
Peace of Mind has To Tame a Land.
Yeah.
You know, very dreamy. And then it's got these, you know, very different types of sections in it. We should pause for a moment and take the question. So Mark says, this might seem like an odd question, but I'm unaware of Iron Maiden ever been accused of something like Orientalism. Just curious based on their aesthetics over time. Wondering now, looking at the new album's cover. I mean, I think everybody who's possible to accuse of Orientalism has been accused by somebody who wants to try to write an article or, you know, make a point on Twitter or something like that. I think that the question would be, is it, can you make like a substantive claim? And when we're talking about Orientalism here, the reference point would be Edward Said's book Orientalism. And I don't know that it's a very good critique of Iron Maiden's stuff. So Ken also says it's interesting, some of their old stuff played live these days is subtly different from the original recordings. New parts are introduced for Yannick. Yeah, so that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Mark says Maiden have some beautifully atmospheric metal moments. That's a good word for it.
That's exactly what it's when I was in high school, people that weren't into metal would say, this, I just want to bang my head and this makes me so angry. And I said, no, this is this is really dreamy. This is like, really relaxing and my mind can flow because the way they sat down and put these things together was so clever. I mean, they're huge pioneers of it. I mean, there's people we could go stop copying Iron Maiden to people. It's like if they, if they do something that they're so. But I agree with that, Mark. Beautiful atmospheric metal moments, and that's how I always saw it. Was like those middle things are just like those middle parts, or Seventh Son when it comes out. The whole ending is just. I used to just listen to that whole 3-minute ending with the solos and the different parts. It was just very, it was great.
So Ken brings up an interesting point. Then we'll jump back into Ken's stuff. Maiden were accused of Satan worship after Number of the Beast. People would buy the albums, publicly burn them, and run away from the fumes. Yeah, I mean, we all remember the satanic panic when Geraldo Rivera did his just terrible expose. My mom actually went and took away my sister's albums, but not mine. I'm not quite sure why. And it only lasted a short while. But back to we probably won't get to everything that Ken says here, but there's a couple other really good ones. Third point, Senjutsu is also peak Maiden in terms of song subject matter. They've traditionally had tracks about history and anti-war on most of their albums. This is no different. While many bands are content to have tracks about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, on Senjutsu we have a track about the ancient Parthian Empire, a song about depression, one about the Mongol invasion of medieval Japan, one about a future ecological collapse. Intelligent songwriting has always been a staple of Maiden. Yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, and it makes it kind of interesting, when we were doing like our thing on power ballads or talking about romance, there's not a lot of that in Iron Maiden. Like Judas Priest, you can find stuff like that. You can also find like, dirty songs, so to speak. I mean, the closest thing that you really come to that in classic Maiden is Revelations, right? She came to me with a serpent's kiss,
Yeah.
Right? But they're not about like, let's party, rock and roll all night or something like that. It's deep stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, even
Mark points out Charlotte the Harlot. So there's an exception. Charlotte the Harlot and 22 Acacia Avenue, right?
22 Acacia.
Those are about screwing.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't really a romantic thing. It was
yeah. What do you think about this fourth point? The musical skill of the band members is fully on display. I don't think it's too controversial to say Steve Harris is the best bassist in all of metal. His skill is on display here. Bruce's voice has aged and matured. He can't sing these days as he did on Number of the Beast, but show me a singer whose voice hasn't even, and he refers even to like Dio. Dio, we know had to tune things down quite a bit, but he still had the same power in his voice.
Yeah.
Rob Halford is interesting. Ken brings up not even Halford sounds like he did on Painkiller. Yes, but I saw a performance of Painkiller where Halford like pulled it off, and it was almost like an athletic performance. You could tell he was using his body to full advantage in doing that. He's using like these singers tricks to get like the full amount of sound, because that's an incredibly tough vocal song. But back to this. So are they firing on all cylinders? I think they are. I think Ken's right about that. What do you think, Scott?
I don't know if the first thing is Dio. I think his voice got better and better.
Really?
I mean, oh God, I loved his voice early on, but it definitely got deeper, and his phrasing got more mature, and the power was still there. And Yeah, like, although I never heard Dio, I saw him live in the last few years too, and he was on fire. I mean, the band was on fire. As far as, are they firing on all? I mean, they sound great. They sound fantastic. And I have a note here. There's a melody that Bruce Dickinson sings on this new album, where the melody is incredible and the way he executes it is incredible.
Okay.
It's on the first disc.
Okay.
But anyways, I don't want to. I'll find it, but it struck me.
This is a good place to talk about not just musical dynamics, but also some of the songs. I do want to say one thing about the musicianship, and it's not so much about musicianship as such. It's more a small criticism having to do with sound, and it's kind of a surprise to me. Like, Steve Harris's bass technically is really great, but the sound to it feels kind of dry, I would say, kind of high, like there's more high end. You're not getting like a heaviness to it. And I can understand why Steve Harris might want to do that, because he'd spend so much of his time walking off of the bass line into fills and stuff like that. So you want to hear it. But I kind of felt like, and so I guess this would be a production thing. I would have liked to have heard a fatter, fuller, heavier sound to his bass.
The thing that happens with all metal albums, and it surprises me, but and I said this earlier before we started, I agree with you, Greg, on that. That if you listen to the older records, you hear the richness of his bass.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, richness. Yeah.
But when they came out with the remasters of all their albums in the mid 90s, late 90s, they were complete junk. And because the trend we always say it, mastering will make or break an album. So Iron Maiden will record, I'll have somebody mix it fantastic, and it probably sounds unreal, but you have to master it. And what they do now is they just make it loud. There's no dynamic range. What I mean by dynamic range is it's to a number system. And this is something to think about when you listen. If your stereo system volume knob's on 3 and it already feels super loud, and the more you turn it up, if it turns into white noise, if you think you forgot A/B it with an original pressing of Peace of Mind, you'll hear a huge difference. So what they've done is, the record companies or whoever says our album has to be louder than the next band's album, and that's really what they do. And
there's a sort of diminishing return with that, right? I mean, you can only get it so loud.
Well, we have volume knobs on our system,
right?
But they think, well, this will be in someone's iTunes player, but we have that in iTunes where it'll keep it compressed so all the songs don't jump out at you.
Yeah.
But on this album, I'll say it's bordering white noise. And the first masters that I got somewhere in time, and I was so disappointed because the snare drum would disappear when the voice came in, and that's because they've done this,
right,
and everything can't exist, and it would shove things out of the mix. So the snare drum would disappear in the song somewhere in time when Bruce Dickinson would sing, and I wanted my money back. And I have a student that's in a hard rock band, and they just finished opening for Slash and Seven Dust and all these major bands, but their album is, I said to her, I said, how much control do you have? Because the mastering makes your album almost white noise.
Yeah.
She said she hadn't even heard it.
Oh, wow.
So I wonder if they hear it, they think it's great, they send it off and it goes off to the masses. I don't know if they get a copy of the CD and they listen to it. That happened with Gene Simmons, actually. They had to tell him the Kiss catalog need to be remastered. He went out and bought every Kiss album and listened to them and said, this is unacceptable. So
Ken says pretty sure that the 95 to 98 remasters were pretty much disowned by the band. The 2015 are much
better quality. 2015, absolutely. I agree with you, Ken.
So because we don't want to spend the whole time on Iron Maiden, let's talk about couple favorite songs. The title track should always be something emblematic. I thought it was a really solid piece, Senjutsu. What did you think, Scott?
I thought it was okay. It's not on my hotspots list.
Okay. What would be your favorite one from the?
Oh gosh, favorite one. Oh, I have a few hotspots. Stratego I liked a lot.
Okay.
That's one where the vocal was doubled, the note octave. It's got that classic Maiden gallop,
That one reminded me of like the stuff on Brave New World.
which I love that album.
Yeah.
That's an amazing record. Days of Future Past, great rocker.
That was my favorite from the album.
And I like their use of synth. It's very minimal, but it almost sounds like an old synth, like an old.
So this is something that I wasn't going to talk about, but since you bring it up, on that song, it's great. I think on some of the songs, there's too much synth. Like it's there constantly, and it wasn't necessary, and it detracts. So, for example, The Parchment. I think it's a decent song. That I like the guitar parts. I don't like the synth in the background, and I kind of felt there was just too much of it.
Okay. I mean, we're not in Turbo Land, though.
No.
I mean, Greg and I always mention as we were growing up how the album was unfolded and the shock we got from, when Turbo came out. Right. It's kind of like, we got to be there on release day. We put it on our turntable, or for a lot of people, Somewhere in Time, where, it was the shock we got from what happened.
Yeah. This isn't Rainbow.
But Days of Future Passes, that's the one that had the great melody. I have that as a note, is that Bruce Dickinson delivers on that chorus. It's a great melody, and the way he sings it is just beautiful. It's it's a good point about like how he can't sing the way he used to, but I really love his voice now.
Yeah.
Robert Plant, he can't sing the Zeppelin stuff, but God, does he sing great. But like I don't know if singing the early stuff means they're as good or better. Technically, they can hit higher notes, but as your voice matures, is it a good sounding voice? Is your phrasing great? In other words, if I showed somebody the first time and never heard of Maiden, would they say that's a great singer? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised.
Well, this is an awesome segue into the next album and the next band. If you're going to do Iron Maiden, you obviously have to do Judas Priest, right? Because they've been rivals essentially, most of their career for so many reasons. And this is an album where Halford's voice sounds great.
Oh my God.
And he has the range, that he always had. He can go down into the deep, crooning, bassy stuff. He can do the growling. Well, it's not, technically growling, but it's the closest that he gets to it. And then go up into, the really high octaves without becoming a falsetto. Now this is a little bit of an older album, Firepower, from 2018. We actually got to see them play stuff from this twice live, once with Uriah Heep and once with Saxon and Black Star Rider here in Milwaukee. And they, this is actually something Scott wanted to talk about too. They supported the album. They mixed in. Well, I actually went to the set list. They did Firepower, Lightning Strike, Evil Never Dies, Necromancer, Spectre, and Trader's Gate on those two tours. So that's 6 out of 14. That's
supporting the album.
Exactly.
I always say minimum 5.
Andy has a few things going back to the Maiden thing. If I was introduced to Maiden through this album and the first thing I heard was the writing on the wall, I wouldn't really dig it. Yeah, and the video with that, I may be a little controversial in saying this. I thought was just awful. Just too many things all packed into like a whole set of tropes. Now, Andy brings up when Bruce Dickinson did his spoken word event and he left the stage before playing the video, the chatter in the crowd overheard as we were sitting there was not the greatest either. Yeah. I mean,
I got to say, that's a weird one to make a video because that beginning is annoying to me because it's got that cowboy kind of.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, I don't want to criticize, but it's
who do they think they are? Tesla?
well, right. It's the first thing I thought of is like they're going to Wanted Dead or Alive land. which I love Bon Jovi. I'm not,
Yeah.
you have to keep them disparate. Maiden here, Bon Jovi. You don't want a Venn diagram of them. You don't want them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lot of overlap in that case. Now, there were some good comments. So Flexistentialist wrote, firepower delivers what many of Priest's contemporaries, including Priest themselves, have lacked for some time now. It's uncompromising in its essence, vicious and unapologetic, a worthy addition to their legacy. I think that's pretty on point. Every song is, on point. Even the ones that are kind of soft, like Sea of Red, get harder as they're going through it. There are a few songs where you're like, this is a decent song. I see what they're doing. It's not one that I'm going to say is awesome, but there are some songs on there that are really good.
I thought that this album was amazing. I mean, I was floored and how great the band sounds. I mean, it's, this is another thing that I was really listening to. Does it sound like a band? And, not so much listening to the guitar solos as the bass, drums, and guitar lay the groove, is the tempo
Right.
good.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I mean, they hit it out of the park, I think. And the songs I love so much. And well, speaking of the guitar solos, I just think all of them were really tasteful. Like a lot of the beginnings of the solos weren't like the normal cliche stuff that somebody would start in rock. Like there was a nice melody to start and bring you in, and there was some rhythmical surprises. I mean, I thought the playing was very thoughtful.
Yeah,
very good.
And and this is the last one that Glenn Tipton was fully able to contribute to. Priest has got a new album supposed to be coming out this year, but it's because of his Parkinson's disease, Glenn can't do everything that he used to. But Richie Faulkner is on fire in this.
He's a beast. He's a great player.
The Vast V wrote, I think this album really solidified Priest's reputation as legends of the genre.
Yeah.
In addition to that they were in their 60s when they released the album, made it twice as good. Favorites include Firepower and No Surrender. And I think that's kind of right. I mean, you could say, well, Priest's reputation was already solidified. Well, yeah, but there were some missteps, and there's a lot of bands that are kind of just like living off their legacy and not producing really good new stuff. They're just playing the old stuff. This was like a great new contribution.
No, you said it perfect. Is I guess that's what I was trying to articulate earlier, is like, are they going to come and just phone it in? Everybody's like, well, where's the, are you guys going to do a new album? When the fans usually don't want a new album, they you go to the show. I mean, I already brought this up, but when Maiden did Matter of Life and Death, they did the entire album. And, my friends that saw the tour said everybody just started sitting down after the third song. And then they played like 4 classics after, 4 or 5.
And then people got up.
And people like went, but people wanted their money back. And I say, well, don't go to that tour then. I mean, I think it's cool that they played the whole album, because this is, like for this is Judas Priest 2018. It's not 1982 anymore.
Yeah.
They could play the 82 songs, but they're not the same people. And this should represent where they are now. And they sound like pros. They're absolutely,
and in concert, when they play some of the older stuff, like Green Man Alicia or something like that, they are playing it basically with the kind of tempo and drumming and distortion that's characteristic of them now. They're not playing it like early 80s. It's changed a bit. Ken had some good stuff here. I admit I didn't expect them to make an album of this quality so late in their career. I thought some of their more recent albums were below par from the band. Redeemer of Souls is particularly weak, though I did enjoy the concept album, Nostradamus. Priests were definitely firing on all cylinders when they wrote and recorded Firepower. And he talks about Richie Faulkner. So I think this is a really good point. This is sadly probably the last time we'll see Glenn Tipton have any creative input into the music of Priest, but I think it serves as a fitting testament to his abilities over the years. He talks about Andy Sneap as well. And then he says, Halford is also on fine form here. His voice is obviously matured, like Scott's talking about, and he can't quite sing like he did on Painkillers or Defenders of the Faith, but then the music has changed. Rather than being balls to the wall metal like Painkiller was, I think Firepower demonstrates a much more versatile and even emotional Priest on tracks such as Children of the Sun, one of my favorite ones,
Great,
and Rise from Ruins. Tracks like the title track and Lightning Strike exhibit a more traditional Priest sound and aggression. So I think those are all very good comments. Those are all very on point. Andy says Firepower was so good and so heavy that when they first started playing it live, when we saw them on that tour, I felt like it was something I'd heard before but couldn't place.
That's a good one, Andy.
Yeah.
That, you know what? A new record has to be that good. The songs have to be that good that if you're hearing it for the first time in the show and you're expecting, you know, all the classics, if your ears perk up going, what's this? And they've made you want to go to the merch booth and buy the album.
Yeah.
That was the point of playing the songs on the tour was, you know, to get everybody to buy the album.
I'll actually say something kind of funny. So Andy and I are married, and her mom came with us to that show. The one with Saxon and Black Star Riders, when the Firepower tour was first taking place, and we went to the merch booth and we got her Andy's 75-year-old mom a Firepower shirt, which then she put on during the concert.
You know, that's so cool because you always got the T-shirt from the tour when we were younger. That was the cool thing, and I love when I like. Well, we'll hopefully get to Blue Oyster Cult, but the times I've seen them, they have the Symbol Remains shirt, and you know, I'm one that I have to have the dates on the back, right? You have to have the dates on the back for the tour.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole album, I don't think there's a misstep on the entire album.
I have stars next to almost everything.
So obviously you're not going to have a favorite one.
Well, Children of the Sun is up there.
Yeah.
Because I call it a halftime dismal rocker. I love that the dismal guitar riffs when they come up, like or you know, I always love how dangerous Heads Are Gonna Roll started. That opening riff for Heads Are Gonna Roll is, I could listen to that intro forever. It's very simple, but it's so cool.
Yeah.
And when you get a guitar part alone that makes that has an emotional reaction, it gives me emotional reaction, I'm already in.
And it's got Halford doing the sort of like crooning, you know, that he would do on like Sin After Sin, or, you know, later things as well. And then, you know, pushing up into the higher range as it goes into the heavy parts. I think the solos on it are really good too.
That's amazing. Yeah, they're fantastic.
I also really liked Evil Never Dies. I probably think that's my favorite one. And it's a very heavy song, you know.
Yeah, and it's got the cool double kick on the chorus, which is like, you know, we all know that,
right.
It's got it's not like the really fast, it's the kind of like eighth note, but it's a certain punch to the groove to, you know, there's different ways you can enunciate stuff with rhythm, and that's one of them. I mean, sometimes going to halftime, which they do sometimes. The first solo in one of these songs is quiet but double time, and then it gets louder and goes to halftime, which was really interesting. Somebody thought of that, and like listening to it like made complete sense. Quiet, faster, halftime, loud. And it really had an impact when it went into that halftime thing. And it was just like, yeah, if you were at that show, you'd probably, you know.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Anything else that we should say about Priest? Because we do have to like keep this moving at a decent clip.
I just will say that the last track was really cool and appropriate. You know, kind of the acoustic intro with the two guitars. I did kind of like how they wrapped the album up with it. And it, you know, listening to an entire album, you do want some form of experience and some kind. You don't want a collection of tunes they throw together at random. So it's kind of like it was a nice thing. They had like a shuffle as the second to last tune, which is cool, like a rock shuffle, and then into that acoustic thing was really pretty sweet. I love the album.
So the next one that we're going to look at is also, from the same era. Also, a band that at least started out as a British band, Whitesnake. Nowadays it's incorporated a lot of other people from here and there. They put out a album in 2019 called Flesh and Blood, and it seems like people's takes on this are a bit more, well, some of this is good, some of this not so good. Ken Bourne said, I enjoyed this album. Coverdale does an admirable job on the vocals. I like the heavier tracks, like Good to See You Again, Shut Up and Kiss Me,
Yeah.
Trouble's Your Middle Name, and Get Up. After All's a nice ballad, but the product is missing some of the blues influence that laid the foundation of their early albums. Ken said, I find it very hard to be objective about this album because I do and always have despised hair glam metals. Well, that's okay, right? But Flesh and Blood is sonically decent and has an excellent production. Coverdale is on fine form. Here's a really interesting comment. For me, the real problem is this is a good example of a band that has failed to evolve, perhaps not in terms of the sound and production, which I think is right, but the song topics, the lyrics. This is hair metal straight out of the mid 80s in the worst possible way. Best example is Shut Up and Kiss Me, a song that I'm not a big fan of, by the way, too.
No, and they made a video for that they pushed that as their single, I think, right?
Actually, so let's pause here. Maybe at a certain point, Coverdale's 70 now. Maybe at a certain point, you do have to move on beyond the innuendos, and it's about slipping it in and stuff like that.
Slide it in, right?
That's right. Yeah. I think I have a Black Flag song rather than a Whitesnake song there, which is all, there's no innuendo in the Black Flag one. So, I think there's really something to this. I actually thought Coverdale's voice on some of the tracks, it's like really there, and it's the David Coverdale that we know and remember from all the way back in Deep Purple on their last couple albums into the Whitesnake band. But on some of them, I think his voice, it feels like restricted. It feels like they were like, don't try too hard, David. Some of the ones where I thought his voice was really coming through. When I Think of You, Color Me Blue, which other ones did I put in here? There were a few other ones where you're like, yeah, okay, that's definitely the David Coverdale that we know from, early 80s. But some of the other ones you're like, he could go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, before I forget, as far as the classic Whitesnake sound, I thought there was a bunch of it on here because the first 2 or 3 songs, there's slide guitar. They're like Joel, or I think Joel Hostra, he's playing slide guitar, and that's like the old early Whitesnake.
That's like when it was the Whitesnake Blues Band.
Yes,
yeah. Right.
And I never put Whitesnake in the. I mean, I guess they had the look of glam, but they, that 87 Whitesnake album, besides Here I Go Again, is a pretty heavy album. Bad Boys, it was like the post Zeppelin mastered to me. So
I think that in that respect, they're sort of like Rat, right? Rat gets classified as a glam band, but they're darker and grittier and heavier.
Yeah, I mean, John Sykes is a nasty guitar player from Thin Lizzy. I mean, you're talking about Deep Purple, Thin Lizzy, all these members. So it's hard for me to say they're Whitesnake's a glam band.
They're not glamming like the way Poison is or Cinderella.
Yeah, I mean, even Cinderella is pretty raspy and bluesy. I mean, I always thought calling a band a hair band, that was made up by I remember when MTV made up that phrase because they wanted to bring in their new hair metal, which was grunge.
Yeah.
Where nobody took showers, where everybody wore flannel, and nobody played in tune. Everything was reactionary. And so they made up this thing that you could discount a band simply because they had big hair. And that's short-sighted, I think. That's just my opinion, because I wouldn't call the singer on Burn, a glam metal guy, you know, the guy on the Deep Purple records, the guy that played.
Well, it depends on context, though. I mean, Andy actually brings something up that I think is kind of germane to this. So she says, I would love to hear what Scott thinks about Coverdale Page as being the direction Coverdale really wanted to go.
Oh, that's a
at that
good
time
one.
as a reason for the later Whitesnake albums feeling completely non-committal. But also, if you think about like Robert Plant, right? So when Robert Plant is in Zeppelin,
Yep.
that's a context, and he can sing a certain way. And by the way, Andy, you know, can tell you some interesting stuff about having seen him live, and how like his demeanor changes when he sings Zeppelin stuff. And then when he sings, like, you know, is it the Honey Dippers? Well,
Yes.
that's a very different context, you know, and it's the same guy who can do both. So whether or not a band is glam kind of depends on, you know, the what's environing it, I think, you know.
I guess, I mean, the content of the 80s. Well, I wasn't a speaking of the follow-up album, Slip of the Tongue, I didn't like that album at all. It was just like they were trying to make the 87 album happen again, and the magic wasn't there. But the 87 album I think is classic. As far as this new one, like the slide, it went back to like the bluesies. There's a couple actually bluesy tune. What track is this?
Bluesy. Flesh and Blood, I would say, is pretty bluesy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a pretty solid album for Whitesnake. Their last few albums, I didn't really, you know, they did the Purple album, they did the Blues album, but then there was the one maybe 5-6 years ago, and I can't remember the album. I have it, but I was like, it's cool, but it wasn't like something I needed to hear live.
Yeah.
But this one, I think they did a good job.
I really liked track 4, Hey You Make Me Rock. It's kind of a classic heavy song. It's got a, you know, John Lord style organ, really great driving riff. They used Coverdale's voice on it. It goes into a lighter bridge, which then has like a blazing guitar solo, you know, like that's for me, that was kind of the standout.
Yeah, that's a great one. I have what's the second track?
Gonna Be All Right. That's another really good one.
I have a star next to that one. I thought that was there's more slide in that one, and it's like the riff was kind of interesting. But
tell me if you think I'm completely wrong about this. I put in my notes kind of Queensryche feeling riff and progression at first.
Oh, I don't think that's I didn't hear it that way, but I wouldn't say no way, man. I think
it's the sort of thing like if you didn't know it was Whitesnake, you'd be like, that could be Queensryche. At least that's the way it sounded to me, you know.
That's an interesting point. Like if you were to play it for each other but not say what it was.
Yeah. Well, you know, on that mark, like Shut Up and Kiss Me, the intro, you could be like, well, that's Joe Satriani. You know?
Yeah, that one, you know, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know about you, but like 9 times out of 10, when a band pushes a hit, it's my least favorite song on the album.
Oh, the one that's supposed to be the big single.
Yeah, and this one, actually going through and doing a little research, I found that video for Shut Up and Kiss Me, and I go, oh, I get it now. This is what they said. We need some kind of hit, David. It's like to a 70-year-old. What do you mean some kind of hit? Like, you know, you're already established. Your fans are gonna, you know, hopefully buy the record. And now I did not do my research. I am gonna go see them, but I'll be curious to see how much they back this album up. How much is in the set?
Yeah, Andy and I have tickets to see Whitesnake with the Scorpions.
Ooh.
On the same tour. And I think we should ask a similar thing about the Scorpions. Why don't we jump into their thing? Because that's you know, another really classic metal band. Got a new album right out, Rock Believer. And it's, you know, so Ken has a good analogy here. He says, the best way I can describe what I think about this album is with a food analogy. Foodies, of which I am one, often imagine huge, incredibly elaborate feasts made of all sorts of exotic ingredients that are cooked in unusual ways. However, sometimes all one needs is a really good quality ham and cheese sandwich to have a satisfying and tasty meal. For me, this album is the good quality ham and cheese sandwich. Nothing overly fancy, but very well written, engaging, good production. The album shows the versatility of the band. It's an upbeat album, doesn't overstay its welcome, and encourages me to hit the repeat button when it's finished. Overall, a great example of the classic metal genre. Worth noting the efforts of Rudolf Schenker in particular. People often say that Schenker has been a huge influence on metal guitar. My answer is which Schenker. Rudolf is frequently overshadowed by Michael, right? Which is, I think,
of course,
somewhat unjustified. And, Scott and I have talked about this before. I think that Rudolf Schenker, certainly in the early Scorpions era, one of the best songwriters, and willing to step back and be the rhythm guitarist and just, be the leader of the band, essentially. So I agree with that. I will say this album, the first time that I started listening to it, by the time that I got to the fourth track, and I actually texted Scott, I was at the gym, I was like, I'm not listening to any more of this, because this is it's the Scorpions, but it's not really good. It's just kind of like, we were talking about phoning it in. I kind of felt like the first four tracks were like that, where, and the Scorpions good is better than a lot of bands great, but none of it was great. And then I listened to track 5, and I was like, oh, well, this is actually quite good.
Which is interesting, because that one is the one that's got the reggae groove, and they make it work.
Right. Well, they've done that in back in the day in the 80s, right? There were a few songs where they would pull that off, and it's got a heavy groove that's alternating with those reggae softer verses. And so I was like, this is good. And then I listened to track 6, Seventh Son.
Yeah.
And that one, I was like, wow, this is like a China White for 2022. It's got that boom, boom, there's nothing fancy about the bass line. Then again, there's nothing fancy about, the same bass line in Running with the Devil, but it's perfect for the song, perfect. Right?
That's a good, I put that here, intro, like Running with the Devil, I put as like what it reminded me of, very simple, but it drives it.
Yeah.
That goes back to what Ken said, sometimes a ham and cheese sandwich is like, I agree.
You don't need to put every ingredient in it, right? Yeah.
If you put in what's needed, sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, but never, that's where people write either ego-based. Like I unpopularly say that up until Moving Pictures, most of Rush was just throwing everything in there and experimenting, which they needed to do. And but I wasn't a big fan of 2112. I just thought they were a bunch of kids experimenting, which is necessary, but I didn't love the album. So as far as this stuff, it's kind of like, it's like, this is all we need here.
I mean, you could say that that's part of what makes this album uneven, is they played it safe on a lot of songs.
Yeah.
They did good work, but it's just kind of, okay, that's a Scorpion song, I didn't like the power ballad that a lot of people seem to have liked, When You Know Where You Come From, because I thought it was kind of trite, be true to yourself, it's your life, and I just didn't find it that interesting. The songs that I liked were mostly ones where it sounded like older Scorpion stuff that had somehow been updated, like When Tomorrow Comes. It's like the 1970s Scorpion song, like Taken by Force or In Trance era, where you've got this really raw, heavy sound to it with a riff.
And the spoken word.
Yeah. And then Mina comes in, and he's still got the pipes, and he really uses it on that. And then there's verses where he's singing, and it's just the bass and the drums, and then the guitars come in with like the wall of all of sound kind of thing. So I thought that was one of the standout pieces on it.
Yeah, overall I was kind of disappointed. There was some stuff I did like. The rhythm playing is awesome. They're both great rhythm players. Here's something nitpicky that I'm going to say that bothered me.
Okay.
Matthias Jabs is an unreal guitar player. I think he's he's a great.
Yeah.
But on this album, so a lot of his leads have some timing issues, and I'm surprised he didn't reshoot it. I'm surprised that, I'm surprised he didn't go, I could do that better, or somebody didn't point out that you're rushing this, or because the classic albums that they recorded on 2-inch tape, he's always on the money. He's got great time. He's got a great elastic feel. He's got this grease, and what a great guitar player. I was shocked to hear. It almost sounded like he's struggling physically to play right now. I mean, I don't know how old he is or what happened, but
well, that's something that we were talking about a little bit earlier. These bands, these classic metal bands, are in their 60s and 70s, and like drumming, you can't be. I don't think there's any drummers out there that are in their 70s still playing. Vocalists, okay, we've got to have adaptations for that. The bass makes its own demands, but to be a guitarist, I don't know. There's some things. I mean, like that's part of what we saw in the case of Glenn Tipton, obviously has Parkinson's, but and that's just putting the whole kibosh on things. But I think maybe in a lot of cases you can't keep up the same sort of thing that you're used to.
Well, it's fine muscle skills, playing guitar or bass. It's not so if you develop, well, there's the obvious ones like tendonitis or carpal tunnel, but if you start getting arthritis, I know some people that are older that still play great, but they're like, I can't play the speed I used to play at, so I have to adapt to that, and which is fine. A lot of times when people get older, they might choose not to play as much, or they might go in a new direction, which is an interesting thing that's come up in some of the comments for all this stuff is, have the bands evolved into something? Are they trying to rehash the past?
Yeah.
And Robert Plant, I think, was a good example. I think that album, I saw the tour, he did a lot of it. The last album was fantastic. Was it a Zeppelin album? No, but he's not a crazy 20-year-old anymore either. And I don't mind as long as it's really good. But yeah, I mean, this album, it's solid. I mean, the performances on all these albums were really good. The content though on this one is like, there's a few things I liked, but I probably wouldn't buy it and listen to it, I guess is the.
Yeah, I mean, I would listen to some of the songs as standouts, but yeah, it's not a Scorpions album. Now, Ken says it's a great album to sing along to while driving. Yeah, so while you're doing something else, it's not. I mean, you could put it up against, like, say, Blackout, or Love at First Sting, or Taken by Force, and you'd be like, no, these earlier ones, they were just like knocking out of the park then. And this is, it's delivering, but it's not at that level. Let's talk about another one though, where we've got a band that really is quite on fire. Also new wave of British heavy metal, has been around a very long time. We've mentioned them already, Saxon. They have a new album out called Carpe Diem in 2022. And they also had an album, Thunderbolt, in 2018, when we talked about seeing Judas Priest on tour. The Saxon is also touring with their Thunderbolt album. This album, we didn't actually solicit any fan feedback on that. We didn't have quite enough time. But there's a lot of things to say about this album, other than the fact that the album art, not the best, but the music, I think, is excellent. I will say this though, there's quite a few songs where you could be like, is this a Saxon song or is this also a Judas Priest song? And like a contemporary Judas Priest song. I'm not saying that they're like, copying or anything like that. I just think they happen to be moving in a similar groove. And they're all shorter songs. Ken says Saxon are on fire at the moment. Great Sneap production and great songwriting. Is Andy Sneap producing their albums? That would explain a similarity in sound, wouldn't it? Because he's,
I didn't realize
he's the Judas Priest guy.
That's interesting. That's That's what we get for not having the album in our hands.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Now,
yeah.
one thing I do want to point out, this is a pretty short album, 10 tracks. And the only song that's longer than 5 minutes is actually my favorite song off of it, The Pilgrimage.
I love that one.
Yeah, that's a real standout. I mean, it's not like they were aiming for radio airplay because they're not going to get it. They're Saxon. I mean, they've had it before occasionally, but they're kind of stuck in the heavy metal, radio ghetto like everybody else, I think, from their time. But yeah, there's some really good songs on there. I thought Carpe Diem, the title track, it's got everything that you'd want it to have. It's heavy, it's tight, it's got some nice solos on it. The one right after it, fulfills Saxon's requirement that they seem to have of every album has to have at least one song that's about a mode of transportation. And it's called The Age of Steam.
Yeah.
But it's a good heavy, every single song on it's got good heavy riffs and nice hooks. The funny line from it, here comes the revolution, here comes the age of steam, and then there's The Pilgrimage, track 3.
Right.
And one of the things that I thought was really cool about this album is they have a song about COVID called Remember the Fallen.
Yeah.
Not a lot of, I don't see a lot of people singing about that.
That's really interesting point, actually. You know what? And I wonder, I'm actually surprised it hasn't been a bigger subject, right?
Yeah. I mean, they frame it in terms of like heroism and stuff like that because, it's Saxon.
Oh yeah. Triumphant.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's a good metal song.
Yeah, I mean, there's great riffs, and it's funny because I have note like the one, is it All for One?
That's another good one, right?
But it's kind of like Stand Up and Shout. That guitar riff is a bit like Dio's Stand Up and Shout.
Huh.
And the tune doesn't go into Stand Up and Shout, of course, but I think the band sounds great. And I actually said this band, the drums are amazing. The band is so tight. I went and there was a Pro Shot concert from recently, and these guys look really old, but they are playing their asses off. The band, I think what Ken says, they are in top form. That is a band, and just the grooves alone, and that's so important. Like, sometimes we take that for granted. Like, in jazz, if you don't swing, it's nothing. Like, it doesn't have any feel, no matter the composition. Well, we grew up with rock. We take it for granted that, if jazz players said, "Oh, all we need is distortion and a power chord," we'd be like, "You guys don't know how to rock." But Saxon, on fire. I mean, I'd pay to go see them in a heartbeat.
We have seen them twice recently, and if they come back here, we're definitely going to see them because they put on a great show. Like you said, they're very high energy. I mean, Biff Byford, I think, is 70.
Yeah.
And I think, of all the people that we've talked about so far, maybe he's got the best preserved voice out of all of these artists.
And he brings it live. I mean, I'm watching this video and he's not messing around, and I love it. And it's
Andy says he's 71. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to catch Saxon if they come by here. Definitely, I would pay nearly anything to see Maiden, Priest, and Saxon do a concert together. You know what? That's a great bill, Ken.
Yeah, that you're probably not going to see anything like that, except at a festival, I imagine, right? Where there's a whole bunch of other bands. But yeah, that would be pretty awesome. I mean, imagine if you put together like Andy points out we saw Saxon open for Priest the first time. We can easily align the stars with 2 of these bands, but getting all 3 onto the same bill, that might be very difficult to do. What else do you want to say about the Saxon album?
I mean, some highlights. I like Supernova.
Yeah.
I like
that one. I actually put in there. That could be a contemporary Priest song. And it's got, a softer interlude with a lyrical guitar solo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's, and I think some of the arranging is really thoughtful. Instead of going, here's a riff, we'll do a chorus and we'll do a solo and then we'll go out. It was kind of like somebody said, well, it's almost like they sat in the old way of like sitting at the rehearsal space going, well, what if we tried this? And there's something to be said for that old model of writing where you all sit in the room together and somebody brings an idea and you work it out. I don't know if that's how they did it. You'd have to ask them, but it could also be the producer saying, guys, right here, we need something that does this. And then they could come up with it. So whatever, in the end, I just think, you know, the best part for me is hearing how good the band sounds. And I think, you know, they're old school. They tracked at least the rhythm section live. I'll tell you that. Because that's not something you know, that's something to get that kind of groove, you know, you have to be playing together a long time.
Yeah. I will say too that their 2018 Thunderbolt was just as good as Carpe Diem. I'd say they're
really
on the same level. Yeah.
That I haven't heard, but I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it was, I mean, that's what they were supporting as when they were lined up with Priest.
Now, let me ask you, did they play a decent amount from that record?
Well, that's so a little bit of a digression here. We saw them 2 separate nights. And on the first night, it was a 3-bill thing. It was Black Star Rider, which is basically what used to be the remnants of Thin Lizzy, you know, Scott Gorham and his band touring. And then when they made new stuff, they called it Black Star Rider. So they got to do like maybe 6, 7 songs. Then Saxon came on and did 8 songs. And they did do, you know, Thunderbolt, Nosferatu from that album, and maybe another newer one as well. But they had to pack in the fan favorites, like, you know, Wheels of Steel and you know, Denim and Leather and that sort of thing. And then Priest did like their whole 14 to 15 song set, so it was quite a long night. But then the next night, I think it was, and Andy can tell me if it was the next night or the night after, we saw them at the Potawatomi Casino, and it was just Saxon and Black Star Rider, and Saxon was the headliner in that case. So I think they played like about 14 songs that time, and it was a good mix. I mean, Saxon by that time, I want to say Thunderbolt was like album number 17. So, you know, there's a huge catalog to play from.
Sure.
Andy says it was the very next night. Yeah. Saxon like hung around, and so did Black Star Rider after Priest moved on to the next place.
Oh, cool.
So that was quite interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Well, we should jump ahead.
Okay.
Now, one that, you know, I'd be very interested to get your take on, Scott, is Blue Oyster Cult's newest album, first in, I think, 20 years, right? The Symbol Remains.
Yep.
And, you know, my overall impressions were, I would say, you know, like with Blue Oyster Cult in general, it's not a metal album where it's like back-to-back metal,
right? But
there are some definite like metal standout songs on it.
Right. And even kind of like Tainted Blood's not a heavy metal song, but the progression is kind of a metal type.
It's kind of a power ballady song. It's not a power ballad as such, but
but it is, and
it's about vampires, by the way. It's, you know, the standout line that I actually wrote down there: "No one to wipe my bloody tears."
And The Alchemist is a great.
Oh, that may be the best song on the album.
It's just, and you know, that's in the set. And I love the opening track. That Was Me. It's just, you know, the vocal content is perfect as far as, you know, him being proud of him being a rebel. And that's kind of like the Eric Bloom that we always loved, like the blues man rants kind of, you know, that he's been doing a little bit more of now, but most of the album I thought was just amazing. But then you get something that's clearly almost pop, like Box in My Head.
Right. Yeah.
It's like a Buck Dharma kind of thing. So I don't think, it's funny because they always say we're not pioneers of metal. We come from the Haight-Ashbury Jefferson Airplane. Grateful Dead, which is like, I don't hear that, but
yeah, maybe that's how they think of themselves, but they veer into metal whether they mean to or not,
I mean, that first album, really heavy riffs.
Yeah.
But like, they have no problem going in and out of a heavy riff and doing it like Champs, and then going into something completely, different, although something holds the whole album together.
I was going to ask you about that. To me, it's sort of like, well, we'll throw in a heavy song, then a poppier song, then, do this. I didn't see a complete continuity to it, but maybe I need to listen to it a couple more times.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess there's some things to these albums that it's so heavy all the time that it's like, I can tune out.
Okay.
It's like, let's just write, 14 punch in the face metal riffs and
so you mean more like the Judas Priest one or the Saxon one that we were discussing, where it is most, or even the Iron Maiden one, it's all metal all the time. Yeah.
And if you're going to do that, the songs better be amazing, because sonically I'm going to get tired.
Yeah.
If you beat somebody over the head long enough, they're not going to feel it after, or you punch someone, they're not going to feel it after a while. It's,
Yeah, I mean, and there's like a wide range of stuff on this. Box in My Head is probably the poppiest song.
Yep.
Nightmare Epiphany is kind of a jazzy song. I really like the bass line on it. It's kind of walking all over the place. What else? There's
the weird one to me is True Train.
That, if there was one that I would take off of
me too,
the album, it would be that.
And they've been doing that live, and that's one of their 5 songs.
I mean, we should say why the song is so weird. I mean, it begins with a train whistle, and you'd be like, okay, well, that's a nice starting thing. And then they use it throughout the song, and it starts out being this bluesy song, and then it like switches to faster time.
It's like a double time country thing almost, and there's a lot of words.
And it's all about the trains,
It's just, and they do it live, and I go, oh, this doesn't fit anywhere in the set to me. I mean,
is it a palate cleanser? Is it?
Well, I just thought it was interesting because I saw them a few times, and I said, you didn't do anything from the album. It just came out. Well, it was coming out of COVID. I mean, that album.
Yeah.
And little by little, they started adding stuff. And the last time I saw them, there was 5 solid songs from it. And, The Alchemist, one of them, of course, that was me. Things I think are pretty hot, like for tunes on the album.
Yeah.
But True Train would just seemed, I mean, they have their reasons.
If this were back in the day, that would be a B-side.
The back in the day, that would be a filler. Like, remember when bands would do something completely out of, just to make the 40-minute mark, because if you have 40 minutes, you got an LP.
So Ken says the track made me wonder if the band are actually train fans.
Actually,
yes, I think so.
Yeah, right. I know Richie and Eric Bloom are huge gamers, believe it or not. And Eric Bloom's a sci-fi nut.
Interesting.
So that's why, like, the old Blue Oyster Cult songs were all about science fiction.
Well, so that's a good segue to talking about Edge of the World, which I think is one of the best songs on there. I mean, The Alchemist, I think, is the best song.
Yeah, The Alchemist is amazing.
But Edge of the World is really kind of cool because you don't realize until you're a good ways into it, like actually paying attention to the lyric, this guy's been abducted by aliens and he's trying to communicate his experience. It's a lovely song with a great hook and a wonderful chorus, and there's great guitar and keyboards on it, and then you're like, holy crap, this guy's talking about this horrific experience.
Well, it's kind of like remember the tune they had, "Take Me Away" from Revolution by Night, was really just telling the aliens, take me, I want to go on an adventure. This is a little different, but it's like extraterrestrial intelligence from Agents of Fortune. They do talk about extraterrestrials or being abducted or
Here's a really interesting point by Ken. I've always wondered if Blue Oyster Cult would have become a sci-fi prog rock act if they'd continued over the years.
It's a good point. I know that's Eric's thing. Eric Bloom is very much into that. And, of course, Buck's tunes are about other things on all, like even Burning for You, right?
Yeah.
Like he'd have the pop rock tunes, which I think I always call them buck hits because he writes a great pop tune. But Eric's definitely.
I think a song that kind of combines those is The Machine, because it's not it's more AOR than metal,
right?
But it's this very dystopian, I'm a slave to the machine, but it's very clever lyrics, right?
Yeah.
Is that one where it's Buck writing the lyrics or Eric Bloom writing?
I don't know. I have the vinyl. I got that when the pre-sale for vinyl. But the albums before, Heaven Forbid, I think was the one before it, and then there was 2 albums. I think the last one was early 2001, but they were okay. I didn't like, but this album I really got excited about.
I like this one. For me, there's enough stuff that really is metal. I mean, I can count. Yeah. I would say, if we're being generous, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs on a 14-track album are arguably metal.
Yeah.
And then some of the other ones are still kind of hard. And then the other ones are groovy,
Yeah.
The sort of thing you like. I mean, Don't Fear the Reaper is not a metal song, but it's still, really nice to listen to. Florida Man is kind of like that.
Oh yeah, right. Florida Man. That's interesting. I just think listening to it, it's just kind of like, I think if they think it's good, it's going to go on the album. And
okay.
At the stage of their career, I really feel like as long as they're being honest with us, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
So I Heaven Forbid, that was Curse of the Hidden Mirror were the last 2, and those were fine albums, but they only play one song from live. They always play Heaven Forbid. No, that's the they play. There's a song that they play, Harvest Moon, and it's every show that's a fan favorite from the album from 2000, which is interesting. I wonder, well, I don't know how much longer they're going to be doing this, but
right. That's a good point. I mean, with Blue Oyster Cult, we're talking about a band. We're reaching now back into the early 70s, right, when their first stuff is coming out, and
72.
Yeah, and so that's a great segue into a yet older band, which only has one original member left, the guitarist Mick Box and band leader Uriah Heep, who we also saw with Judas Priest. Andy and I used to joke around that, seeing Judas Priest was like becoming the consolation prize because they were touring so much with all these other great bands that we wanted to see. But Uriah Heep put out an album, Living the Dream, in 2018, and it's a great album.
I love it.
Ken actually weighed in on this earlier, saying along with UFO, they were the progenitors of so many new wave of British heavy metal bands. I think that's completely right.
I agree.
UFO, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Uriah Heep and Deep Purple actually were recording in the same studio in different rooms on early stuff. And there's so much continuity in the early ferment that creates heavy metal and then leads to the new wave of British heavy metal. So he says, I feel genuinely privileged to have been there in the early days of it, the regular excitement of opening a new tape from bands like Maiden, Saxon, so many great bands. Heap very much influenced most, if not all of them. I think that's completely right.
And I totally agree with that. And it's a mystery to me why people don't talk about them or they're not familiar with them, who are,
Well, should I go off on one of my rants?
Please. Please.
So there's this narrative that gets put out there, and Rob Halford unfortunately does this in a self-serving way, even on stage sometimes. And there's music writers who do this, and a lot of younger people don't know this. they don't know that the narrative is false. And the narrative runs like this, there was like proto heavy metal, and then there was Black Sabbath. And the reason why they played the way that they did was because of Tony Iommi's finger, and they were like the only band really doing that. Well, there was Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, but they weren't really metal. It was Black Sabbath. And then they were alone in the wilderness this entire time until Judas Priest took up the mantle in the mid 70s. And then, everything boomed after that. And if you know anything about music history, you're like, okay, so there's two ways that this is complete bullshit. Actually, three ways, right? Let's just take the British scene. Yes, in 1970, Black Sabbath puts out 2 albums, and Deep Purple also, is bringing something out, and Uriah Heep and UFO, right? And they're all part of this like heavy sound that is equally contributing to things within like this is something Scott and I actually did a show on, right? 1970 to 1974, there's all these bands that are doing stuff that's going to be metal in the British scene. And then, there's also American bands, right? Montrose is doing metal, right? Yeah. We've got other things happen, Sir Lord Baltimore, who toured with Sabbath. The Scorpions are starting to, get their act together. And so this like, oh, in the 1970s, it was just Sabbath and then it was us. Bullshit, and then it ignores the fact that like, Motorhead was there too, right? And all these other bands that were there. And so Ken says people think that metal was Sabbath to Priest, yes, to Maiden and everyone else. And I think
I hear that all the time.
There's a lot of disinformation, and I think younger people who are interested in metal, who are getting introduced to it largely through the genres, that have spiraled out, then they Google and they see somebody saying, yes, it was Black Sabbath, and then it was Judas Priest, and that was it. How do they know? And so Uriah Heep was one of those key bands that like Ken is pointing out, all these people were listening to Uriah Heep, or they're listening to Deep Purple. Like, right. Bruce Dickinson doesn't say, oh, I wanted to be like Ozzy. He says, I wanted to be like Ian Gillan. Steve Harris didn't say, I wanted to be like Geezer Butler. He said, I want to be like Pete Way,
That's true. But the Uriah Heep thing is it's kind of a mystery, and bringing and listening to this album, it really brought that back to the surface for me. How great this record is.
Yeah.
And and then going back and going, like I think they're just, by so many people, they're kicked to the curb, whether they don't know any better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying is kind of like, if Rob Halford's saying it, everybody our age or after are kind of like, oh, well, Rob Halford said it, or not to put it all on him, but he's not the only one.
Yeah. Well, there are like encyclopedias of heavy metal that put this out there as well,
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So here's another thing that Ken says that I think is like totally dead on. There's much to like on Living the Dream, classic heavy rock at its very best. I'd say that fans of Dio era Rainbow will be right at home with this album. I think that's completely right.
I agree with that.
And Dio era Rainbow is inheriting stuff from Deep Purple. There's some Purple-esque elements to this. Songwriting is strong as always from Heap. Production is excellent. Bernie sounds as good as he ever did. I can't pick a standout track but that's more of a product of the fact that their songwriting is consistently good. And yeah, it's one of those albums that I think a lot of people probably, unless they hear somebody recommending it, they're not going to give it a chance.
It's a good point. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, they're one of those bands that like people might check out the new Priest, but
right,
but I would tell people, this is really worth your time or your while.
It's kind of got all the things that a good Uriah Heep album has, really heavy songs where the organ is playing a major role.
I love it.
And, Mick Box on guitar is still great.
Fantastic playing.
There's a couple proggy songs like Rocks in the Road, I would say is more proggy than anything else. Waters Flowing is a softer kind of old school heap ballad about, people coming from miles around to listen to this guitarist with his great sound who plays down by the water. I mean, basically every heap album has a acousticy kind of song on it like that.
Yeah.
But then the rest, like Raised by Heaven, really great starting song. My favorite is Take Away My Soul, which they played in concert.
Oh, interesting. I was going to ask, that's another thing. We should have been keeping tabs with our favorites.
Which ones are they playing? Yeah.
Yeah. But that's really cool because I wonder when they decide which ones from the new album to play. Do they see it on forums? Like everybody kind of votes, or?
That's a good question. I mean, when we saw them, they were supporting Priest. So I think they got to play maybe 10 songs. And again, they've got a huge catalog, sort of like Blue Oyster Cult or like
Right.
Saxon, where they got you can't do a Heap concert without playing Gypsy.
Right.
Or I don't know if they played Bird of Prey, but some of the older stuff where you got to play those. They did play Grazed by Heaven. I think they may have actually opened with that.
Oh, cool.
Or with Take Away My Soul. I don't remember any of the other songs being played, but 2 out of 10, not bad. Ken says, I can't say enough good things about this Heap album. Of all these albums, the one I've had on constant repeat since yesterday has been this one. Yeah, it's a very listenable album. It's not one I think that we're going to get bored with.
No, I agree with that. That's, I still do buy music, but sometimes it's kind of like, am I going to listen to this? And this one, yes. The Priest, yes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, having it on repeat. Yeah, I'll listen to that in the car, or I'll listen to it when I have some time off. It's, it's great, especially that this is the band today. We're lucky enough to hear these bands writing and putting music out today.
Well, that's another good point. I mean, when we saw them performing, it's not all original members in the band except for Mick Box, but they're all most of them are as old as Mick Box.
Yeah, right.
And the organist is like just on fire while they're playing. I think they have a younger drummer and I think they have a younger bassist.
I'm gonna have to look up some live stuff just to check it out the way I did with Saxon.
Yeah. But they really, they in concert, it was a pretty amazing performance. They weren't phoning it in any way.
That's amazing. That would be a disappointment, I think.
There's to go and see a band where,
there's the I guess the 14, 15, 16-year-olds still in me where if I was really disappointed. I went to one Blue Oyster Cult show and Eric Bloom was sick. No rants, no Godzilla rants, no, pointing out at the crowd. No, I love that stuff. I love the showmanship. That's part of what rock and roll is you go into a world and it's like, nowadays rock bands, kids look like they came out of a bar that are playing like they've got like, they're not really dressed for anything. They don't, nothing looks cool. There's no concept. There's no world to subscribe to. And I think that's something that's kind of cool. Love it or not, the theme of an album, they're giving you some kind of, they get together and they have some kind of concept, right?
Somebody who we're going to look at later on in another like album review thing, who just has the best time on stage when we've seen him is Udo Dirk Schneider.
Oh yeah.
And he's an old guy, little squat, bald German guy, who surrounds himself with younger musicians who are all into playing his stuff and playing the classic accept stuff. But I think he's not doing any more accept stuff. We saw him a while back, but the joy that he has in being up there and doing these songs, it's like a wave that goes out to the audience.
It is
amazing.
I agree. And Ken says, Ken agrees too that I see some of the younger bands and I hate when people say, well, you're old fashioned. That's kind of ageism, right? Like, well, the new thing is, we don't want to make a world. It's just about the music, man. Well, it's about a lot of things. Rock and roll can be a lifestyle.
Yeah,
It can be a world to escape to. I mean, look, movies. It's like we're gonna get people that can't act. We're gonna get people like, but the content's there.
yeah.
It's like part of the experience going to the show and having that unity of everybody around you. You don't know, but you're all like, there's 10,000 of you going, oh yeah, they're doing this one. And I find that now it shows, people my age or older than me that were like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this one. Or there's that whole unity and the band is doing something in their performance that's I still relate to. I didn't grow out of it. As people say, you should grow out of it. No, it's part of the
I mean, when I go to the grocery store, I still, while I'm taking the cart out to the car, start, pushing it fast and ride it down there. I think there's quite a few things like that in our lives that, if we were like an earlier generation, maybe we'd be like too ashamed to do that, or some yet older people would be like, knock that off. Right. But now we get to, we get to revel in that. There is one other band that we are going to look at, and, they're a band that started out as glam, but have expanded considerably, led by Tracy Guns, the lead guitarist. He's the constant in it, and that's LA Guns. And I do want to note that they've been very prolific. We're reviewing Checkered Past, which is 2021, but in the last 6 years, they have put out 4 albums: Missing Piece, The Devil You Know, and Renegades. It seems to be a pretty stable lineup, which is good. Their bassist is certainly on Checkered Past is a studio bassist. He's not the touring guy, which is kind of
interesting. I didn't know that.
He does a lot of music producing, and it's a so we Scott and I both gave this a listen. I enjoyed it. I was back in the day, I was not listening a lot to LA Guns, but I thought we should check it out because they're doing a lot of work, and maybe we shouldn't just all be British bands and with the Scorpions thrown in. There were some songs that I liked, some that I was less into. They managed to put in a countryish kind of ballad on track 4 that's not, I'm not into that kind of stuff, but there's some that are quite good on there, I think, too.
Well, yeah, like I didn't like Get Along. I didn't like the folkier tunes, but I thought the hot spot was Bad Luck Charm. That's cool. That was my favorite tune on the album.
That was the one earlier. I said there was one where it sounded like he was channeling an Iron Maiden guitarist, maybe Adrian Smith or Dave Murray, on the solo.
Yeah.
It's got that sound to it.
It's a great, and Bad Luck Charm is kind of a blues title, so it's kind of like this like heavy guitar. It was a really good riff. I think that's the second track, right? It
is, yeah.
And then I was like, this is going to be cool. And then the rest of it went to that kind of borderline folky, rock, where it was like, to me, it just didn't. I had to listen to it in a few different. I couldn't listen to the whole thing all the way through.
Oh, really? You mean the whole album?
I jumped off after the third song, and then I came back because I started to kind of blur it out, and I wasn't going to give the songs a fair listen because I'm like, I'm tired already, which is interesting. But I did think Bad Luck Charm is a notable, great tune that, if they're going to keep going on, that should be in their set all the time.
I liked Better Than You as well, and Cannonball. I thought those were pretty good. That Ain't Wise, it got a nice bass line to it. There were a few where like Living Right Now, the third track, it starts on, it seems like all over the place, and then by the end it got better. But maybe part of what's like making this work is Tracy Gunn's guitar solos. It's showcasing his abilities in that, so you're a little bit more forgiving about that.
Yeah, I mean, the performance on the album is good. I mean, it's pro quality playing.
Yeah.
I don't want to dismiss this album.
It's not inspired.
No, it's not like how I felt about like like Saxon, or
Right.
some of it was just kind of they captured like you're there, you're still there,
Yeah.
um,
Ken says pretty good album. I wish they stopped the revolving door of band members. And maybe that's part of it. I mean, if
Yeah.
your bassist is a studio guy that you're not going to tour with, can you really gel as a band,
well,
the same way?
It's a really good point, because if you've been playing a long time with somebody, I always use U2, because everybody's like, well, this guy's the best bass player. Well, or, Neil Peart's the best drummer. Well, no, I mean, he's the best drummer for Rush.
Yeah.
He was the best, or,
you wouldn't slip him into Quiet Riot and get quite the same result.
No, he sounds great in Rush because the band plays great together.
Right.
And
some of the bands that we're looking at here have had stable lineups where there have been a few people coming in and out, but for the most part, the band is the same for at least 15 to 20 years. Like Uriah Heep, for example,
Yeah. And even 5 years is notable if you've been playing together. It's not like, so I use U2 because those early albums are unbelievable. And I remember when U2 came out in the early 80s, everybody was like, oh, they can't play their instruments. And I'm like, this sounds pretty amazing to me. And it's not about, the drummer wanting to do the most crazy drum solo or the bass, but the sounds were amazing. The Edge is a genius. And I was like, they sound good because they play together a lot. You don't pull them out and do a drum clinic.
I mean, the earliest stuff was kind of, I'm not going to say minimalist, but there was a rawness to it. Yeah. And the guitar sound evolved to the Joshua Tree, which is what I consider to be their like height. I didn't really like the stuff that came after.
No, I had a hard time with Pop and Pop Song Baby. Like I had a really hard time when they went there. I mean, I respected that they did something different, but it kind of lost heart to me. But I'm no disrespect to them trying stuff.
I will say two things that are kind of critical about the lyrics of these songs on Checkered Past. So track number 8, Dog, it's a good groovy heavy song.
Yeah,
there's way too much "gonna be my dog," as a line in there. I mean, it became like a filler basically, right? And then there's this other song that's
a good point,
more like 80s garage rock sounding, Knock Me Down, and it's kind of an anthem. It's not really a metal song. When you listen to the lyrics, these sound like just a horrible couple, you're like, oh man, I don't know if I like this. Certainly isn't something I'd want to sing along to,
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to like have, Dave Mustaine joking around on Peace Sells Who's Buying, I'm not kind, I'm not your kind, that sort of thing. But this is just like relentless negativity,
No, that's a really good point. And I like your point about filler. We don't only have filler tracks, but we can have filler lyrics. Like, when you hum things, here's the melody. Well, what happens with these 3 beats? I don't know. I'll say this again. There's 3 syllables there. That's a good point. I didn't think of that, but I agree.
I mean, if you have 3 syllables, you can always say "ooh, ooh baby." know?
Exactly. That's the allowed filler.
Exactly. Yeah. So, most of the albums that we've reviewed, were mostly positive about. I'd say, the Scorpions one, maybe a little bit less so. The LA Guns, a little bit less so, but still all worth checking out,
I'm glad I checked them out. Either way, I'm glad.
Yeah. There weren't any like real stinkers in there. So
No, but there's definitely reviewing that many, or I should say listening to that many, you see who's really, because they're capable of doing amazing things, all of them, because they have.
Right, right.
Who's going to put in the time, or who's going to be like, well, we just need to put something out to, let's just put something out.
Well, and they're kind of like, they're neck and neck, right? We can say, okay, this Judas Priest album is really great. Is Maiden measuring up to that?
Well, right.
So,
yeah, but I think both, really did an amazing job. I mean,
and Saxon, if we're talking about that era of British metal,
Saxon, yeah. Maiden, it took me a while to get into the album. It's not my favorite Maiden album by any stretch, but it's a well played, well done, well thought out album. And I think, like it or not, if I could listen to this, I'm going, wow, this is top notch playing. This is top notch thought thinking. Then it doesn't matter if I don't want to listen to it. They did a really good job.
Yeah, I will say this too about the writing on the wall. I saw the video first with the music, and that kind of soured me on it because the video was just such a hot mess of way too much stuff going on. And listening to it without the video, once you get past the twangy country thing, it's pretty good,
Yeah.
So, well, we should wrap this up. It's getting, we're way past time. Thanks to everybody who joined us, and especially thanks to Ken for all these really great
Ken,
insights and comments. It was
well valued.
And we're going to do some more of these, like I said, in the future with like new wave of British heavy metal in particular, and then some other genres as well. We'll figure out what we're going to call the genres. But yeah, thanks for joining us. This has been very enjoyable. I think this is kind of a cool thing to do, to check out these new offerings and not just like remain way back in the past, I'm only going to listen to Peace of Mind.
I agree. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, we'll see you all.
Take care.